Why do you think there has been such a lack of safety testing on 5G technology?
Because they know it's dangerous. The industry knows it's dangerous. Big Wireless knows it's dangerous. If you read your own cell phone manual, the manual will tell you that you should not use the device for prolonged periods. You should try not to have it by your body. So they know the technology is dangerous. And that's why they're just trying to get as much of it out there as they can before they're finally held accountable. Sadly, we've seen this all before. We saw it with big tobacco, we saw it with lead and gas, and in every single case, the big corporations did what they always do. They lied, and then they paid off politicians, and they paid scientists, and they silenced people and discredit them, and sadly, they did get away with a lot of it, and that's what we need to make sure doesn't happen with 5G.
We're just walking on our way to the Herald building. Okay. Starting to go up. Oh, there they are. There's a bunch of antenna up there. And as we approach them, we cross the highest threshold it shows. It's above 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, and we're at 600 milliwatts per centimeter squared. And it says we should avoid long time stay in this area. We're way above the safe limit with 4G technology. If 4G is crossing thresholds and 5G increases by an order of magnitude, maybe that's something to be concerned about.
First of all, G just means generation. 5G technology is just a marketing term that surrounds a whole bunch of other technology, including more powerful phones.
5G is coming, and with each successive network, the frequencies used, like 3G, 4G, 5G, are getting higher frequencies with smaller wavelengths.
When we're talking about millimeter wave, especially in the application of 5G, we're talking above the 8 gigahertz range. What we need to keep in mind is that spectrum includes waves that are normally filtered out by the Earth's magnetic field. So we are not normally exposed to those waves on a daily basis or are evolved to deal with.
It's really high here, the RF. It's interesting. That's really interesting. Trees are actually, you know what, we shouldn't be cutting trees down. We should be planting more trees. As soon as I walk by the tree, it drops way down.
And so the kind of wavelengths that will be used in 5G, they do not travel as far. They're absorbed by things like trees, your skin, buildings. And so in order to create the communication that they're going for with 5G, they're going to be placing frequent cell towers. Just because of the smaller wavelength, it has to be propagated.
The deployment of small cell emitters is a concern of mine. And the reason it's a concern is because these small cells have to be located in close proximity and with line of sight. So it means, for example, trees have to be cut down. It means we need a lot of them. It means that very, very many orders of magnitude more radiation than is necessary, exceeding the FCC's already too high levels of emissions.
We are now going to artificially greatly increase the amount of exposure that we have. On top of that, we're going to bring the emitters right next to our homes, right next to our schools, and the amount of radiation we're going to be exposed to has never been done before in known history, and we're all going to be exposed to much greater levels than we ever have.
I mean, we're at the beginning, the infancy in our understanding of what electromagnetic fields do to the body, and we're all wondering, is it a problem? We function because of moving currents in our body, okay? That's a basic principle. Nerves function because of shifts in electric charge. And the movement of electric charge in our bodies is affected by radiation from the outside, okay? And the structure of the water in our body is very important for normal function. And that also is affected by charge coming from outside the body. And when you understand those two basic things, you see that this whole field of the electromagnetic spectrum affects us. And it was then that I started to tell my patients, well, if you're not feeling well, we might want to see if you can turn off that Wi-Fi router at night, try and limit your use of cell phones. So these kinds of things have just gradually come into my practice, and as you start to understand more and more about it, it makes a person pause when you think about 5G coming up.
Now, if the federal trade decision has made you wonder about the contents of your cigarette, you can be glad if you're smoking Chesterfield.
Chesterfield gives you scientific facts and names its ingredients. Chesterfield uses tobaccos pre-tested by laboratory instruments. Outside independent consultants include many eminent scientists from leading universities for the most desirable smoking qualities, entirely safe for use in the mouth.
Believe me, friends, Chesterfield has for your smoking pleasure and protection every advantage known to modern science.
So there have been studies done all the way from the 2G era up. And there are two types of studies. Like when Big Tobacco ran their own studies, there are industry studies, and those studies are heavily biased, and they try to pretend like this technology is safe, and it's not. The unbiased studies that we've seen coming out pretty overwhelmingly say that this technology causes health problems, anything from headaches to cancer, most of that cancer being found in rats. And we have the industry trying to blow off those studies by saying that, oh, well, rats aren't humans. Well, rats share 97% of their DNA makeup with humans. We actually have more in common with rats than we do with most apes. So we should really care if this technology is causing cancer in rats, because they are very similar to us biologically.
Looking at recommendations like the World Health Organization in 2011 telling us certain frequencies are possibly carcinogenic, and more recently the university in Sweden, in Örebro, Sweden, put out a statement saying that there clearly is evidence that this can be carcinogenic in several different tissues in the body, and we can't just call it a possible carcinogen. And I think that the fact that other countries are really looking closely at this, I hope that this is going to lead the United States to join in and try and protect people and make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Leopold, that's a retirement community, and what we know is that people that are above a certain age and below a certain age are much more vulnerable to the range of electromagnetic radiation. So I'm curious about what emissions look like. There we go. So as I've been walking around in front of the building, I've been seeing numbers between 10 and 30 milliwatts. According to this reference card, above 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared is a problem for long time stay. And this is a residence for hundreds of elderly people. Look at that, we're now seeing some spikes going way above 100.
There are certain subsets of people that have more problems. That tends to be the very old, the very young, and also people who have some genetic susceptibility, and we know that electromagnetic field radiation can cause DNA damage. What we're seeing though is that multiple chemical sensitivity, food sensitivities, extreme fatigue, weakness, brain fog is big, and sleeping is also a big issue for those people. Right now, the majority of people feel fine, but the question is, do they have the same energy that they used to have? Do they have the same sharpness that they had when they were younger? Do they wake up ready to go? Because these are subtle things that can happen over time. And these kind of subtle things can be indicators that they actually are suffering from the electrosmog around them. But if you're living in a place where when you sign into your computer, you get like 20 networks, that means you're like in the middle of a storm you cannot see. And when I think about what it would be like to live in New York City or Los Angeles, where you see cell towers everywhere and people are in high-rise buildings with like a gazillion routers, my heart just goes out to the people who cannot control that, and they are forced to live in that kind of environment. And it's important that as physicians we begin to recognize that this is something that's truly happening in our patients.
There's a lot of questions. That's the reason that we're concerned. We're not saying that no 5G or no emissions of any kind are ever a good idea. It's that it needs to be studied. We need to have a sensible approach instead of doing like we've done so many times in the past, where we've let powerful corporations do what they want, and then we have to clean up after them. So maybe this time we can think ahead a little bit and have a measured deployment so that we don't have to clean up after the mistakes.
It's not just a local issue, it's a global issue. Because we have satellites for 5G, we're going to be putting small cells everywhere, which means a lot more people will be in direct line of sight of 5G emitters and constantly bombarded. We need to realize as a species that we have done a lot of damage to the planet. And a lot of that damage has been done because we didn't take the time to do proper research before we rolled things out.
I love my cell phone. Don't get me wrong, I really do. And I use it a lot. I'm trying to be careful with it. But I don't want it to harm my children or my grandchildren. And I want to know what's going to happen as we use electronics more and more.
And you know, it's funny to me because we have this pretend race with China for 5G, and you'll hear this come out of especially the current administration a lot.
As this committee heard just a few weeks ago, the United States is engaged in a high-stakes race with China, South Korea, and others for leadership in 5G. It's critical that the United States win this race and the jobs and investment that will come with victory.
That's all smoke and mirrors. We already lost this pretend race that we're having with them. This pretend race reminds me a lot of the war on drugs. The Chinese manufacture virtually all of our cell phones, but even China has a more reasonable standard for the amount of radiation it allows its citizens to absorb than the United States does. This is our generation's version of tobacco.
The gentle sounds of springtime seem to say relax and be refreshed. And just as gently, Salem brings you springtime refreshment. For Salem special paper, air softens every puff, breathes in fresh, cool air to bring you a softer smoke.
So currently, in the United States, as far as I know, we do not have any regulation on EMF. In fact, we even have some legislation that says you can't force a telecommunication company to take down a cell tower, even if you have health effects.
And just to clarify, the FCC has its own idea of what acceptable emissions are, largely dictated by the telecom industry, which interestingly enough, are higher than the emission standards of Russia and China, two nations which aren't known for their environmental protection.
The bottom line here is that the FCC has been busy removing consumer protections in almost every industry that you regulate. The FCC can make a difference when you focus on the greater public interest, not on fulfilling the wish list of a few large companies.
The money on my mind, I count it every time.
Many of our federal agencies, particularly FCC, have a long history of being influenced by the corporate telecommunications sector.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I count it. Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 24, 7, and I stack it. Our party's going down, and everybody's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, jumping on the floor.
Luckily, we can be proud that our FCC has been corrupt for a very long time. It's just a little bit more corrupt now.
Too often during the last year, the agency acted at the behest of the corporate forces that surround it, shortchanging the American people. You can see it clearly with our rollback of net neutrality.
Then there's that whole thing we seem to have forgotten about, how all these big telecoms attacked our First Amendment rights and attacked net neutrality in the not too distant past. We should have stopped doing business with them as soon as that happened.
I dissent from this spirally spun, legally lightweight, consumer harming, corporate enabling, destroying internet freedom order. I dissent because the public can plainly see that a soon-to-be toothless FCC is handing the keys to the internet, one of the most remarkable, empowering, enabling inventions of our lifetime, over to a handful of multi-billion-dollar corporations.
The money got my mind.
One of the challenges that presents to local officials is how do we fight this giant collaboration between the largest corporations in America and the federal government to basically serve corporate interests rather than the public's interest. That is overwhelming. I can understand. I feel overwhelmed by that too.
I try never to explain anything with conspiracy that I can explain with laziness or stupidity.
With respect to modernizing our rules, we are cutting through the regulatory red tape and making it easier for broadband providers to invest in next-generation networks.
To do that, in March, we exempted small cells, which are the building blocks of next-gen networks, from the costly federal review procedures designed for much larger 100-foot towers.
The FCC has greatly overreached its authority. The FCC is not a health organization, yet they are allowing a dangerous technology to be deployed everywhere. Some cities are resisting, but it will come down to whether their governments are willing to fight on behalf of the people or not. And they elected good government officials.
And the problem is there's a really big lobby, right? I mean, the companies, they want to move things forward. If we could just stop where we are and confirm the safety of what's happening now before we do something that's going to deeply affect our kids.
See, it's funny, I'm a technologist. I'm not against people using technology. I just don't want us to be stupid about the way that we're doing it. And this is, 5G is an unintelligent way to roll out new technology.
What people can do is to recognize that every year is an election year. So there's always city council members, county council members, local politicians running for office. And by talking to them, they're prone to make commitments because they want your vote. So this is the perfect context in which to ask for change and undertake a study that will allow people in the community to be able to make their own choices.
Sounds like an inside deal to me.
And if your politicians are unwilling to do their job and fight for the safety of their citizens, then they need to be replaced. We need politicians that will stand up for their citizens and sue the FCC. And we need to realize we are far behind most of the rest of the developed world. And the reason we're behind them is because we don't have public fiber optics. One of the lies that big telecom puts out there about 5G is that, oh, it's going to be so fast, the latency is going to be so low, it's going to replace fiber optics. It's laughable to think that 5G can replace fiber optics because 5G requires fiber optics. Fiber optics is the 100% safe solution as well. It just carries light. So some of these cells are going to be so close to houses and businesses anyway that you might as well just hook directly up to the fiber and actually have choice of how much EMR exposure you're getting.
I don't think it's realistic to expect our city officials and county officials to magically stop the problem. But it doesn't get better by sticking our head in the sand. It is possible for local communities to tell the federal government to wake up. And I think people in Portland, people in Danville believe that that's possible. And they're doing it.
As consumers, we cannot buy this technology. When our providers try to force us into this technology, we can tell them we don't want it and why, aside from just not buying it. You can use wired connections in your home. Even the Nintendo Switch has a USB wired connection now.
You can do things like turning your router off. Some people go so far as to sleep in a canopy that protects them from EMF.
Nobody's saying we shouldn't continue to advance as a society. We're just saying we should do it in a way where we don't poison ourselves. Our best defense against this is not to install 5G, not to deploy this technology. The case for more research is clear. Until that's done, we have to not put this technology in.
You just don't give the 3-year-old the knife. I mean, and so that's kind of almost how it seems, is with an unknown being unleashed all over the world that 5G is. Is that going to be dangerous? I have seen no studies or tests on the 5G network in terms of safety. That's the greatest concern right there. And until we understand more, it is going to be hard to say what's going to happen when 5G rolls out. You and I are rats in this experiment. We really are. So I think that's something that hopefully, wouldn't it be nice if it didn't have an effect, but it has to be studied by scientists.
My name's Rebecca O'Brien. I live in West London. I've been electromagnetic sensitive for roughly 17, 18 years. My main symptom is headaches. It just literally makes my head feel like it's being squeezed.
It was more like a vice that's crushing your head. I thought it was due to the fact that I'd moved from a 2-bedroomed bungalow into a small flat. So that went on for about 5 days, and then I went to see my mother in the north of England, and it went. So I thought, great, you know, it's just stress. So I came back to the flat and it started again.
Frequently when I come out of the building and leave for the day, I get lightheaded and dizzy. It's strange that there's nothing wrong with me medically in terms of an inner ear infection or fever or any kind of sickness. It's been happening for probably about 2 years, year and a half, 2 years now, I guess. I'm thinking it might be related to EMF radiation.
It's really not fun to live with, and the thought of 5G is only going to make things 1,000 times worse.